Nobody at Vethrak Transit Hub assigned me to that game. I want to be clear about that from the start. I was a level 2 security officer with a transit posting, a folding chair at the edge of the commercial floor, and a half-eaten protein sleeve going cold in my jacket pocket. My job was to watch the luggage claim corridor and make sure nobody walked off with anything that wasn't theirs. I had no rank worth naming, no title anybody cared about, and no business standing anywhere near the private salons on the hub's upper level, where Thessian nobility came to conduct Thessian affairs. I ended up there because a vending unit jammed. I'll explain that in a moment. First, let me tell you what Vethrak was, because you have to understand the place before any of this makes sense. It was a rim world hub, one of those stations that exists because 4 transit lanes happen to cross in the same gravitational shadow. Nothing glamorous sand came through the filtration seals from the planet below and settled on every surface by midday. The commercial level smelled like recycled air and fried protein, and the walls above the departure boards had been repainted so many times you could pick at a corner and find 9 colors under the top coat. It was the kind of place where people waited for their connection and tried not to think about how long they'd been waiting. I'd been stationed there for 19 months, transferred from a garrison posting when my contract ran out and civilian security paid better. I didn't mind it. I was 42 years old, and I had stopped needing things to be glamorous around the time I was 27. The upper level was different. Same sand, same recycled air. But the Thessian delegation had booked the salon block 6 weeks in advance and spent 4 days installing their own filtering units, their own lighting fixtures, and a set of silk wall panels in deep indigo that hid Vethrak's peeling paint entirely. I'd seen the setup request come through the security office. They were here because this hub was neutral ground, not Thessian-controlled, not belonging to any of the 3 systems whose delegations were also on board. When Thessian nobility needed to conduct a negotiation that couldn't happen on their own soil, they came to places like this. The specific negotiation, I learned later, was a betrothal dispute. Princess Vethrak was 28 years old, the second daughter of the Thessian ruling house, and she had been promised by her father's court to Lord Adjutant Cavathsor, a warlord who held 3 mineral-rich corridor systems and had been circling the Thessian house for a decade looking for a way in. Thor was 51 and had the look of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who outranked him, which meant almost no one. He was broad, pale-skinned, with the kind of flat, deliberate authority that doesn't raise its voice because it has never needed to. Princess Vane had filed a formal objection to the match under the Thessian rite of challenge. What I knew was that a catering unit on the upper level had jammed with the salon locked from the inside. The delegation's food service coordinator was on the external freight deck dealing with a supply discrepancy, and the only person in the building with an upper-level maintenance authorization key was me, because my predecessor on the evening shift had filed the duty transfer paperwork incorrectly, and the key was still sitting in my belt pouch. I took the lift up, knocked twice, announced maintenance, and a Thessian attendant opened the door just far enough to hand me the malfunctioning unit access panel. I was supposed to fix it in the corridor, hand it back, and leave. Instead, I was standing wending with the panel in my hands when the door swung fully open because someone on the other side pushed it without warning. I saw the salon for the first time. I saw her for the first time. She was seated at a low lacquered table in the center of the room, and the table held a vethrak board, the Thessian strategy game, hexagonal lattice, dark and pale stones, the kind of board I'd seen in the transit hub's common gambling rooms a handful times because Thessian traders loved the game and were usually willing to teach it to anyone patient enough to learn. I had learned it from a cargo hauler named Veth during a 6-hour delay 14 months earlier. He'd beaten me 3 times, then beaten me more slowly the 4th time, and told me I had the right instincts but kept second-guessing them. The woman at the board was Princess Vethrak. I didn't know her name yet, only that she was wearing the deep blue formal sash of the Thessian house, and had the bearing of someone who had grown up in rooms where posture was non-negotiable. Her skin was pale cinnamon ochre in the salon's warm light, her hair a crown of short charcoal black natural coils, eyes pale, silver green, and currently fixed on the man across the table from her, with an expression that could have stripped paint off the hub's walls. The man across from her was Kaveth Sor. He was smiling. "You're still 2 moves from a bind," he said. She didn't answer him. She looked at the board. Between them, standing at one corner of the table with his hands clasped at his back, was an older Thessian advisor, whose expression suggested he was in moderate physical pain and had been for some time. Along the far wall, 3 of Kaveth Sor's personal guard stood in the kind of relaxed attention that means you've been standing there long enough to find a comfortable version of it. Nobody looked at me. I had the maintenance panel in my hands, and I was standing in the open doorway because the attendant who'd let the door swing open had already moved away to deal with something on the far side of the room. I should have stepped back into the corridor. I didn't. I watched the board. Van Thessel reached forward and moved a dark stone 3 hexes to the left, placing it in a position I recognized from my games with Veth. It was a commitment move. Once you placed a piece in vethrak, you couldn't take it. That was the rule that made the game what it was, and what she'd done was sacrifice her rear cluster to reinforce the center. Kaveth Sor saw it, and his smile went slightly fixed, the way smiles do when someone realizes a situation is less settled than they thought. He had more pieces in his forward line. He still had the numbers. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he intends to own. "You'll run out of stones before you reach my command piece," he said. She said, "That depends on how I reach it." The advisor made a small sound at the corner of his mouth and looked at a point on the wall just above my head. That was when he noticed me. He crossed the room in 6 steps. "You have no business, maintenance call," I said. I held up the panel. "Catering unit. I'll be out of your way in a moment. This salon is closed too. Kaveth." Van Thessel's voice was quiet and even, the way a blade is quiet until it moves. She hadn't looked up from the board. Let him stay. The silence in the room changed texture. Kaveth Sor looked at her. She still didn't look up. "He's a laborer," Kaveth said. "He's watching the board." She placed another stone. "Is more than you've been doing." That was the moment, I think, that I should have understood. I was stepping into something that had weight. But I was watching the board, and she was right. I had been watching the board. And the move she'd just made was not the move I would have expected. She was thinning her flanks in a way that looked like vulnerability, and was actually something else. And I couldn't quite see the shape of it yet. And that was the kind of puzzle that has always been able to hold my attention longer than my common sense can argue it down. Kaveth Sor looked at me the way he probably looked at cargo manifests, noting what was there, assigning it a value, moving on. "Fine," he said. "A distraction." He addressed her again. "You understand what this game settles." "I wrote the challenge," she said. "I understand it perfectly." The right of challenge was a Thessian legal structure that allowed a noble to contest a contracted arrangement through formal competition. One chosen contest, one session. Winner takes the question. She had challenged the betrothal through vethrak. If she won, the match was annulled. If she lost, the contract held. Kaveth Sor had accepted the challenge because he was 23 games into an unbroken streak against Thessian opponents, and because he was the kind of man who never considered that winning was anything other than a certainty. At some point, I set the maintenance panel on the floor by the door and sat down on the nearest chair, happened to be a low-backed thing in the corner near the wall panels. The attendant came back, saw me, and opened his mouth. Van Thessel said, still without looking up, "The chair is fine." The attendant closed his mouth. I watched the game. "I won't try to explain vethrak to you as if you were learning it for the first time. That would take longer than this story. What I will tell you is that it is a game about commitment and information. Every piece you place is permanent. There is no taking back, no adjustment, no revision once your hand lifts off the stone. The entire game is built on the premise that you must see several moves ahead before you commit, because you cannot undo what you've done. This means the best vethrak players do most of their work before they touch the board, and the worst players, the ones who lose, touch the board too quickly when they think they see an opportunity without seeing far enough past it. Kaveth Sor was good. He was genuinely good. His forward line was strong, his command piece was well protected. And he had built a formation over the last several moves but was designed to close in on her central cluster from two sides simultaneously. On a normal reading of the board, she was losing. But she wasn't playing a normal game. I could see it now, sitting in that corner, with nothing to do but watch. She had been constructing something for the last 8 moves that he hadn't fully seen yet. The thinned flanks weren't vulnerability. They were bait. She had left him a corridor, clear line of advance that looked like the obvious winning path. And it was obvious because she had built it to look that way. If he took it, if he committed his forward line into that corridor, he would be extended, his formation stretched, his command piece suddenly relying on pieces that were 3 moves from being able to support it. And her rear cluster, the one she'd seemed to sacrifice, was not sacrificed at all. It was positioned exactly where it needed to be to close the other side of the trap. She was going to win. I realized this the way you realize a door has been unlocked. Not with a sound, just with a shift in how the whole picture sits. And I sat with it for a moment, quiet, looking at the board. Then Kevithsor saw the corridor. His expression moved. The smile came back, fuller than before, the kind of smile that belongs to a man who thinks he has just seen the end of a problem. He reached for a stone. If I take this line, he said, he was talking to himself or to the room or to the ceiling, the way men do when they're performing confidence. You'll have nothing left in your rear. Nothing at all. Shh. Vethrak looked up from the board for the first time since I'd entered the room. She looked at him with the pale silver-green eyes, and the expression of someone who has waited for exactly this. Then it's a good thing, she said. The human in the corner sees it differently. Every head in the room turned toward me. I looked at her. She looked at me. Expression was entirely composed, and her eyes were doing something difficult to name. Measuring, maybe, or inviting, in the way that people who have been very alone in a room full of their enemies sometimes look at the one person present who has no stakes in the fear outcome. Kevithsor's smile went rigid. He turned in his chair to look at me fully. The maintenance worker, he said. He's been watching for 20 minutes, Vaughn said. He's the only one in this room who hasn't made up his mind already. So, she gestured at the board once, with 2 fingers, not at a specific point, at the whole of it. What do you see? I should not have answered. Every reasonable instinct I had said to pick up the maintenance panel, apologize for the intrusion, and leave. I was a transit security officer on a RimWorld way station. This was not my game, my negotiation, my anything. I looked at the board. He's going into the corridor, I said. And if he does, you'll close it in 4 moves. The advisor made the small sound again. Kevithsor's expression moved through several states quickly, landed on something that was not quite anger yet, and was building toward it. That's not possible, Kevith said. Her rear is stripped. Her rear is placed, I said. 2 stones in the 4th and 6th hex. She can pivot both into the flank support if you extend. You'll have committed before she needs to. Kevith looked at the board. Then he looked at me again. His voice was very careful. You play vethrak. A little. He stood. He was half a head taller than I was, which I noted without much feeling about it. He was smiling again, but it was a different kind of smile, the kind that means something is being decided. Then let's see how a RimWorld laborer's a little holds up, since the princess seems fond of your analysis. What happened next, to me, was not something I planned or sought or would have chosen, Vethrak said. New challenge. Her voice was quiet. The room went still. Under the rite of challenge, she said, looking at Kevithsor, with the expression of someone placing a stone they have been thinking about for a long time, a second party may be substituted. If both participants formally agree, I withdraw and name a substitute. She looked at me. The human plays in my place, under the same terms. Kevith stared at her. You can't be. You accepted the rite. The rite permits substitution. Agree or concede the original challenge. She folded her hands on the table. Your choice. The advisor had stopped making sounds. He looked like a man watching a ship come apart from a dock, not certain whether to jump. Kevithsor looked at me for a long moment. Then he sat back down. Fine, he said, if he wins. And here he did something that men like him do when they are very certain of something, which is to make it into a performance. He opened his hands toward the room, toward his guards, toward the ceiling. If this laborer wins, I'll release the match contract entirely. and she can have him, for all I care. He turned to look at me with the flat, pleasant authority of a man announcing an outcome he considers settled. Enjoy your game, vethrak very quietly said. If he wins, I'll be his wife forever. That was what she said. I heard it. The guards along the wall heard it. The advisor heard it. It fell into the room the way a stone falls into still water, and the rings of it kept moving. She looked at me when she said it, and her expression was unreadable. But there was something in it that was not nothing. I couldn't tell you what. I was 42 years old, and I had learned over time to notice when someone is making a decision about you, and to pay attention to the weight of even when you don't understand it yet. I sat down at the board. I looked at the position Kavith had built. I looked at the position she had built before she'd withdrawn. Then I looked at my own pieces. Her pieces. Now mine to play. And I thought about what I was trying to do. The game took 41 minutes. I won't walk you through every move. What I will tell you is that I lost my center cluster on move 14, which I had expected and prepared for, and that Kavith spent the next several moves building toward what he thought was a finishing position, which I let him build, because I needed him extended and confident, and that the thing Veth had told me 14 months earlier, you have the right instincts, but you keep second-guessing them, was in my head the whole time, and somewhere around move 22, I stopped second-guessing. The room had gone very quiet by move 30. Kavith's guards had come away from the wall at some point, and were standing closer to the table. The advisor had his hands in front of his mouth, and was watching the board with the expression of a man recalculating something urgent. Kavith himself had gone still. He was a good player, good enough to see, around move 35, exactly what had happened. How far back the shape of this loss had been built. How many moves I'd known something he hadn't. Cleanly the board had been leading him somewhere he'd never meant to go. His face went flat. Not angry, not yet. Just flat. The way faces go when a person is processing something they didn't account for. On move 41 I placed the last stone and his command piece was bound on 5 sides. He looked at the board for a long time. Then he looked at me. You play vethrak, he said again. A little, I said. He was quiet. His jaw moved once, like he was going to say something, and then he didn't say it. He stood. He looked at the board one more time. Then he looked at vethrak, was sitting perfectly still with her hands folded, and her pale silver-green eyes giving away nothing. The contract is void, he said. His voice was controlled. I'll give him that. Under the rite. He left. His guards followed. The door closed behind them. The salon was very quiet. The advisor let out a long breath through his nose and sat down in the nearest chair, as if his legs had made the decision without consulting the rest. Him. I looked at the board. There was something satisfying about it that I couldn't quite articulate. A game played to the end, every piece where it was supposed to be, nothing wasted. Vethrak spoke. You saw the corridor 8 moves before he did. 6, I said. Maybe 7. 6, she said. And you didn't say so immediately. It wasn't my game to comment on, I was watching. She studied me. You knew I'd invite you to comment. I thought about that. I thought you might, I said. The way you were watching me watch the board. Something shifted in her face. Not much. She was a woman who had grown up in rooms where showing your thinking was dangerous, but something taught you, she said. A cargo hauler in the common room. 4 games about 14 months ago. He beat me 3 times. The 4th, he beat me more slowly. She made a sound that was almost a laugh, quiet, contained, like she'd decided to let a small amount of warmth through a very narrow door. The advisor was looking between us, with an expression that suggested he was composing a report in his head, and was not sure what category to file it. Your transit security, she said. Yes, before that, garrison. Far station contract 7 years. Before that, standard infantry. She nodded slowly, as if filing this away in some interior system that had already been running for some time. My house owes you a debt, she said. The right of challenge requires the substitute to be named. Your name will appear in the record. I know, I said. That's fine, is it? Wasn't quite a question. I looked at her. I wasn't planning to spend the rest of my posting in anonymity anyway. That got a fuller sound. Still contained, still the sound of someone not quite accustomed to things being lighter than expected. But real. I'll need to formally record the outcome, she said. With your name and your station. Saren Vale, I said. Transit security, level 2, Ethanol Hub, Sector 7 rotation. She repeated it once quietly as if committing it to something. Saren Vale, yes. She was quiet for a moment. The board sat between us with all its pieces in place, and the light from the salon's fixtures came down warm and even, and somewhere's the filtration system, a seal was cycling the way it always did around this time of the afternoon shift. I said something, she said. For the game, you did. She looked at me steadily. I meant it as a legal term. Under the rite, a substituted player, who wins on behalf of the challenging party, inherits the party's standing in the resolution. It was the correct formal language. I understand, I said. Do you? Legal standing under the rite, I said. Yes, I follow. Another pause. Longer this time. It was also, she said more quietly, not only a legal term. I looked at her, she looked at me. Her hands were still folded on the table, exactly as they'd been. But the pale silver green of her eyes was doing the thing I'd noticed when she first named me into the game, measuring something close to it, or something that measuring doesn't quite cover. I thought about what Veth had told me. You have the right instincts, but you keep second-guessing them. I said, I'd like to understand that better, if you're willing to explain it. Something settled in her face, not eyes exactly, but something adjacent to it. The quality a room gets when the last tight thing is released. Sit with me for a while, she said. I'll explain it. I sat. Outside, in the salon's corridor, I learned afterward there had been a small crowd. Kavith Soar's guards had said something on their way out. A few words, nothing elaborate, just enough to explain why they were leaving, on why the Lord Adjunt's expression looked the way it did. And the delegation's support staff, the attendants, the 2 catering supervisors, who'd come up to address this jammed unit, the Theshian House secretary, and 3 transit hub officers who had absolutely no business being on the upper level, had gathered in the corridor by the time the door opened again. The advisor came out first. He stopped when he saw the gathered faces, and he looked like a man who had accepted that certain things were no longer attainable. The rite is resolved, he said, which was the formal language. And then someone, I was told it was one of the catering supervisors, though she always denied it afterward, said the words, just said them. Not dramatically, not to cause anything, simply because the words existed and the moment required them. If he wins, I'll be his wife forever, the supervisor said. And then, he won. It spread the way things spread in enclosed spaces. Through the corridor, down the lift, through the delegation's communications net, through the transit hub's staff channel. And by the time Van Thessel and I walked out of that salon, 40 minutes later, there was not a person on the floor who hadn't heard it. I don't know what I expected. I'm not sure I was expecting anything. I had spent 41 minutes playing a board game and perhaps another 40 minutes sitting with a woman who had surprised me entirely. True. And now I was walking through a hub corridor with yellow light coming through the solar shade panels, the filtration system cycling, and the boarding announcements running on a 3-minute loop the way they always did. And the world was the same world it had been before, except that it wasn't. She walked beside me, close enough that I was aware of the proximity, which is a different thing from closeness, and also, in some ways, more honest. At the corridor junction, she stopped. I stopped. The record will be filed this evening, she said. My house secretary will send a formal notation to your station chief. Your name will appear in the Theshian court record as the resolving party. Thank you, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Is there something you want to say? I thought about that. You could have won that game yourself, I said. You had the position for it. Yes, she said. I did. Why substitute? She looked at the junction board on the wall, with its departure listings and its transit codes, and its 4 colors for 4 different route classes. And then she looked back at me. Because I wanted to know what you saw, she said. And because a man who sits down in a room full of people with something to lose, with nothing himself at stake, and watches a board, really watches it. That is someone I wanted to know something about. You took a considerable risk on that instinct. I know what I saw, she said, simply. The way people say things they've been certain of longer than the conversation suggests. I looked at her. She looked at me. The supervisor in the corridor, I said. The one who repeated what you'd said. Yes, she wasn't wrong. Von Thessel's eyes did not move. Expression did not change. But something in her face did the thing it had done before, in the salon, let a small amount of warmth through a very narrow door. No, she said, she wasn't. We stood at the corridor junction for a moment longer than we needed to. The boarding announcements ran through their loop. The filtration seal cycled. The light came in yellow and even through the solar shades. I have 12 days remaining on this posting before my contract reviews, I said. I have 8 days at this hub before the delegation departs, she said, a pause. The common room has a vethrak board, I said. 2, actually. The second one belongs to the supervisor who jammed the catering unit. She looked at me. That isn't the jammed unit supervisor. No, I said. Different supervisor. But she'd probably lend the board. Something settled fully in her face then. Not a smile exactly, more the aftermath of one. The way a room looks after the window has been opened and the air has changed. She said, tomorrow, after the formal filing. After the formal filing, I said. She walked back toward the salon. I walked back toward the lift. At the top of the stairs, I stopped and looked down the corridor, because something made me look, and she had stopped at the salon door and was looking back. That was all. Just looking. The way people look. When they're thinking about something, they're not ready to name, but are not going to let go of either. I went back down to the commercial level. I found the maintenance panel I'd left by the door. I fixed the catering unit because it was still jammed and someone was still going to need to eat. I filed the repair log. I sat down in my folding chair at the edge of the luggage claim corridor with the half-eaten protein sleeve in my pocket. It was cold now and not worth finishing. And I watched the announcement scroll. The supervisor from the catering team came past an hour later on her way to the freight deck. She slowed when she saw me. Heard about the game, she said. Word travels fast, I said. In this place? Give it an hour, and the freight dock will have a version with 3 extra characters and a sword fight. She looked at me. So what do you think? I thought about the board, and the 41 moves, and the way she'd said my name as if she were putting it somewhere she intended to keep it. I think, I said, that I should learn to play vethrak properly. She laughed and kept walking. I sat in my folding chair until the end of the shift, and the announcements ran their loop and the filtration system cycled, and Varath Transit Hub turned and turned in the gravitational shadow of planet below, ordinary and unremarkable in all the ways it had always been. And I thought about pale silver-green eyes and a board with all its pieces in place, and about a woman who had done the math on a risk and decided she could see far enough ahead to commit, and about what it means when someone like that sets a stone and lifts her hand. She knew what she saw. She said so. I think she was right.